What do you do when the only thing left of someone you loved is a horse they left behind? The question wasn't something you said out loud. It was the frost cracking under your boots in the brittle morning air. It was the smell of old hay and damp earth that hung in the barn, a scent that had seeped into your wool coat and seemed to live there now. It was the way the Montana wind whispered through the gaps in the stable walls, a lonely sound that carried the first sharp bite of winter. This was the inheritance. Not money, not property. A responsibility. A ghost in the form of a 1-ton Mustang named Apollo. Your father had always been a man of grand, quiet gestures. The kind of man who would rather fix a broken hinge than buy a new door, who found a kind of sacred peace in the rhythm of hard work. And in his final stubborn year, his project had been Apollo. A wild thing captured from the Pryor Mountains, all coiled muscle and stormy eyes. A creature that mirrored the untamed, lonely places your father had always seemed to love most. He'd written letters about it, his handwriting getting shakier with each one. The boy is coming along, tough nut to crack, but we have an understanding. You hadn't understood then. You'd been angry, living a life 1,000 miles, away in a city that never slept, too busy to visit, to see the fading light in his eyes for yourself. Now, you were here, and he was not. The coffee in your thermos tasted like ash. You took a slow sip, watching your breath cloud in the air, and leaned against the rough-hewn post of the round pen. And there he was, Apollo. He stood at the far end, a statue carved from shadow and defiance. The morning sun caught the deep, dappled gray of his coat and the ugly, ragged scar that cut a pale path across his left shoulder, a souvenir from a life lived on the jagged edge of the wild. He didn't look at you. He looked through you, his gaze fixed on some distant point on the horizon, on a freedom he could surely still smell on the wind. He was the most beautiful and the most broken thing you had ever seen. The first week, you'd just sat on the top rail of the fence, not moving, not speaking, just being a quiet, non-threatening shape in his world. You'd read a book, or pretended to. Mostly, you just watched the way his ears swiveled at the cry of a hawk, the tense ripple of muscle along his flank when a truck backfired in the distance. You learned the language of his fear, the way he'd freeze, every fiber locked, before exploding into a frantic, circling gallop that kicked up clods of dark earth. Today, you climbed down from the fence. Your heart was a frantic drum against your ribs, a rhythm you were sure he could hear. You kept your eyes soft, your shoulders slumped, trying to make your body a question, not a demand. The crunch of your footsteps in the frost seemed deafening. He swung his great head toward you, and for a single electric moment, you were pinned by the dark, liquid depth of his eye. You saw the white sclera showing, the quick, nervous flare of his nostrils tasting your scent on the cold air. Fear, coffee, grief. You stopped. You didn't know what you were doing. You were a graphic designer from Seattle. Your expertise was in Pantone codes and kerning, not in gentling a creature born of thunder and rock. You felt like a fraud, an imposter in your father's worn-out boots. You held out your hand, palm up, empty. It trembled slightly. A fool's offering. He took a single, abrupt step back, his hooves thudding heavily on the hard ground. A warning. A gust of wind lifted his dark mane, and he shook his head, a sharp, irritated motion that spoke of pure contempt. This was a dance, and you didn't know the steps. You were going to get trampled, but you didn't move. You held your breath. Your arm began to ache. You thought of your father's last letter, the one that had arrived a week after the funeral. Don't try to break him. That's not the point. Just try to hear him. What did that even mean? How did you hear an animal that spoke in silences and threats? Minutes passed. The cold seeped through your jeans. Your hope, a fragile little thing, began to shrink and wither. This was a mistake. You were alone in a frozen field with a relic of your father's solitude, and you were more alone now than you had ever been in your crowded city life. You were about to drop your hand, to admit defeat, to turn and walk back to the empty, silent house. And then he blew out a breath, a long, shuddering sigh that plumed in the air between you. It wasn't a sound of surrender. It was a sound of fatigue. The fight, for just that one moment, seemed to drain out of him. His head lowered just a fraction. His ears, which had been pinned flat back, relaxed and swiveled forward. Curious, he took one step, then another. His movement was not the graceful trot of a storybook horse, but a cautious, hesitant shuffle, each step a calculated risk. He stopped just an arm's length away, close enough that you could feel the immense heat coming off his body, could smell the primal scent of him, dust and sweat and wild sage. He stretched his neck, his nose quivering, and he didn't sniff your hand. He bypassed it entirely. He lowered his head and pressed the soft, warm velvet of his muzzle against the zipper of your coat. He held it there, just for a second. A breath. A connection. It wasn't a nuzzle. It wasn't affection. It was an acknowledgement. A silent, seismic shift in the universe of that frozen, round pen. You felt the touch vibrate through the hollow of your bones, a current that short-circuited your grief, your fear, your loneliness, leaving behind nothing but a stunned, perfect silence. You didn't move. You barely breathed. And when you finally, slowly, turned to walk back to the house, your legs unsteady beneath you, you heard the soft, steady thud of hooves behind you. You didn't look back. You didn't dare. But you knew. He was following. You, stopping when you stopped, his breath a warm ghost on the back of your neck. He followed you all the way to the gate, and stood there, watching as you walked away, as if waiting for you to turn around and explain what, in God's name, was supposed to happen next. The following weeks were a language made of small things, the way Apollo would now amble to the fence when you arrived, his ears giving a single acknowledging flick, the way he'd let you curry the winter coat coming in thick across his shoulders, your hands working in slow circles, the dust motes dancing in the cold afternoon light. He tolerated your presence. Perhaps, on a good day, he even seemed to expect it. But a wall remained. You could touch his body, but his spirit was still somewhere far away, locked behind that distant, stormy gaze. And then the strange things started. It was the music first. You'd started playing an old radio in the tack room just for the noise, to fill the hollow silence of the barn. Classical, usually. It was the only station that came in clear, all soaring strings and quiet piano. You noticed it one Tuesday. A piece by Tchaikovsky came on, something swelling and dramatic, and you were oiling a leather bridle, not really paying attention. But you looked up, and Apollo was frozen in his stall. Not the frozen of fear, but of absolute, rapt attention. His head was high, his ears pricked forward like twin satellites, every line of his body focused on the crackling speaker. He stood that way for the entire 4-minute piece, and when it ended and the weather report began, he shook his mane and went back to his hay as if nothing had happened. You didn't think much of it. A coincidence. A curious horse. Then it was the words. Your father's old dog-eared copy of Swan Lake was on the shelf. You'd always meant to read it, to understand the ballet he'd loved so much. You were talking to Apollo one afternoon, just filling the silence as you brushed him. He always said this was the story of transformation. You murmured, more to yourself than to him, a creature, trapped in one form, waiting to be revealed. At the word transformation, Apollo's head snapped up. He turned and looked directly at you, a deep, searching look. He took a step closer, his nose nudging the book in your hand. A chill, unrelated to the cold, went through you. The final clue was the most painful. You were in the attic of the old house, looking for extra blankets, when your hand brushed against a small, lacquered box tucked behind a trunk. Inside, there were no jewels or important documents, just a single white satin point shoe, its T-20 ribbon carefully wound, its toe scuffed and scarred from use. Tucked inside was a faded photograph, a much younger version of your father, his hair dark and full, beaming with unguarded pride, his arm around a woman with eyes the color of dark. Honey and a laugh that seemed to leap right out of the faded paper. On the back, in his firm handwriting, Ilara. Opening night. My forever Odette. You'd never heard that name. Ilara. Who was she? A secret? A ghost he'd loved before your mother? The questions swirled, a vortex of things you would never get to ask him. You took the box, your heart a heavy, aching stone in your chest, and carried it down to the barn. You didn't know why. It felt like it belonged there. Apollo was waiting. He seemed agitated, pacing the length of his stall. When he saw the box in your hands, he stopped. He let out a low, soft whicker, a sound you had never heard him make before. It wasn't a demand. It was a recognition, a longing. You opened the box, you held up the satin shoe, and Apollo bowed. It was a slow, deliberate, and profoundly graceful dip of his head and neck, one foreleg bending, his body curving, into a line of pure, heartbreaking elegance. It was a movement you'd seen 100 times in recordings of ballet. The prince's bow to the swan queen. The truth didn't dawn on you. It crashed over you, a wave so immense it stole the air from your lungs. This wasn't just a wild horse. This was her horse, Ilara's, the woman in the photograph. Your father hadn't just been gentling a Mustang. He had been trying to reconnect with a love he'd lost, teaching a wild creature the language of the art she had loved. The music, the words, the movements. It was all a ghost, a memory etched into the soul of this animal. The dam inside you broke. The grief you'd been holding back for months, for your father, for the time you'd lost, for the love story you never knew. It all came pouring out. You sank to your knees in the fresh straw, the satin shoe clutched to your chest, and sobbed. Great, heaving sobs that felt like they would tear you in two. You cried for your father's lonely heart. You cried for the woman named Ilara. You cried for the beautiful, impossible thing he had tried to do. You didn't hear Apollo move, but you felt him. A warm, solid presence beside you. He didn't nuzzle you. He didn't whinny. He simply stood over you, his head lowered, his breath warm and steady on your back. He was a shelter, a silent witness. He stood there, unwavering, as your storm raged, his massive body a wall against the world until the sobs subsided into shaky, exhausted breaths. He had seen this before. He knew this grief. He was waiting for it to pass. Weeks later, the first true snow fell, blanketing the ranch in a soft, silent hush. The transformation was quiet, but it was everywhere. The house didn't feel so empty anymore. Your coffee tasted like coffee. And in the round pen, a new dance had begun. You'd put the radio back on, and when the right piece of music would swell, Apollo would move. Not with the frantic energy of a Mustang, but with a strange, collected grace. A pirouette here, a collected trot there, his powerful body finding a poetry in motion you could never have imagined. It was on one of those afternoons, as you watched him move in time to a waltz, that you finally understood. Your father hadn't left you a problem to solve. He hadn't left you a burden. He had left you a key. Apollo wasn't a relic of your father's solitude. He was a bridge, a living, breathing connection to a part of your father's heart you never knew. A love that was too big to ever truly die. In trying to heal this horse, you had been learning to listen. And in listening, you had found a way to finally, truly say goodbye. The snow continued to fall, covering the scarred earth, making everything new again. You rested your arms on the fence rail, watching the wild Mustang who had learned to dance. He wasn't hers. He wasn't your father's. He was his own. And so were you. Sometimes, the ones who carry you through the deepest grief are the ones no one else saw coming. If this story found a place in your heart, then you know these moments of connection are what make us human. If you want to be here for the next story that just might change your heart, then do us a kindness. Subscribe to the channel, leave a comment with your thoughts, and press the bell icon so you never miss a daily moment of quiet truth. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening.